Hello, welcome back to My Hot Kitchen. I'm Wendy, and we have an awesome menu worked up for you to share with your sweetie on your next date night at home. Tonight's feast features Cornish game hens stuffed with chèvre dressing, spaghetti squash spirals, and a nice greens and apple salad with your own house-made balsamic vinaigrette. So let's get started on that stuffing first. This is a very simple stuffing. You're gonna need about 2 ounces of crumbled Chevre cheese, that's also called goat cheese. A nice handful of spinach cut up into chiffonade cut. It's basically just chopped up. About half of a red bell pepper, also chopped up. And about 1/4 cup of crushed croutons, but don't crush the schnout out of them. You want to leave them nice and square. Fold this goodness together. Well, maybe I should have chosen a larger mixing bowl, but we're going to make this one work. And to it also add some herbs. I have about 1/2 teaspoon of fresh basil and 1/4 teaspoon of fresh rosemary and 1 green onion. Just fold it together. You don't have to get too fussy about it. You want that Chevre cheese to maintain its nice large chunks and everything else to just sort of back up the cheese. Now let's get those Cornish game hens. Now I have the Cornish game hens brining in a nice mix of apple cider, water, seasonings, spices, and all that jazz. And they've been brining for about 4 hours. Now I ended up using 2 cups of apple cider vinegar, 2 cups sugar, 1 cup of water, about 2 teaspoons worth of salt, and some nice aromatics, rosemary, bay leaves, peppercorns, and allspice berries. I'm gonna give them a nice little flip here, pull it out, drain it, and then I have prepared a nice little baking rack, if you will, by wedging up a couple of potatoes and putting them in my pan. Now this is pretty straightforward. You just take your dressing and stuff it in the birds, and then we'll truss them. Now, brining and stuffing a bird is an incredibly relevant topic for this time of year where everybody's getting all excited about Thanksgiving. So if you like this sort of preparation for these game hens, you can easily translate it to a preparation for a gigantic roast turkey. This is not your typical stuffing, but this is something that would definitely delight any guests that you have over, and will surely delight your sweetie on your romantic date night in your own home. And brining, of course, is an old technique that you hear more and more and more about every day as people look for ways to infuse flavor into foods without adding a lot of calories or a lot of cost to the meal. And it basically just means you have a sugary, salty solution that you soak the meat in, which infuses it with moisture and flavor, and also helps to tenderize it. That is why these little game hens are gonna knock your socks off. Now we're just gonna truss these little guys. I'm gonna do it low-tech style. I'm just gonna tuck its wings back behind its neck and just draw the legs closed. These guys are little, so they don't need a full trussing to be awesome. The whole purpose of trussing is to make the meat plump out, especially the breasts, so that they cook properly and that they cook evenly. Tuck it back behind the ears, or behind its neck. Game hens don't have ears. And just tie that on, nice little bow. And I'm gonna give my hands a quick little wash here. Always important to wash your hands after handling raw meat. Now, for the roasting, I'm gonna jam these guys in the oven. I've got my oven preset to 325 degrees because I favor roasting the birds on a low and slow temperature. Makes them nice and tender. So the next menu item to work on is going to be the spaghetti squash spirals. Now let's talk about spaghetti squash for a moment. It has a lovely, fun, stringy texture that I feel is underappreciated in the culinary world. I don't see a lot of recipes featuring it. So that is one reason why I decided to feature this. There's lots of great things about a spaghetti squash. It's inexpensive, especially when it's in season. It's a nice gluten-free alternative to spaghetti, and you know, it's just got a really distinctive texture. So you want to slice it open lengthwise so that its strings are the maximum length, and you just want to scoop out the insides, much like you do a pumpkin or butternut squash. And set those aside. These are super simple to make. Get all that stringy stuff out of there. And then bake it face down in a water bath. The seeds are delicious toasted as well. And a little thing I just learned about seeds, about squash seeds, is that if you just let them ferment in their own pulp for about a day, they come out just absolutely divine when you go to toast them. Now you want to bake them in the water bath because the steam helps to cook the squash and make it a nice texture. I'm just going to go ahead and slide it in atop the game hens and let it cook for about a half hour or so. We're going to need to check in on those game hens in a few moments and baste those too. So about 10, 15, 20 minutes into the roasting process, I like to baste my roasted birds. Now I like to do it later as opposed to right at first because I feel that it maximizes the natural fats that are present in the skin of the chicken or the game hen or the turkey or whatever. So if you let it roast for a few moments first, the fat kind of comes out of the skin and does a little self-basting before you even get started. Now this is my technique. You feel free to do it however you like it, but this is just something that I've found that works really well. And then I'm going to hit it with some black pepper on the skin after I put the butter on there so that it stays put. Now let's put it back in the oven and let it do its thing until the spaghetti squash is ready to come out. Hi everyone, it's Wendy and I just wanted to tell you about my e-cookbook, Date Night at Home Recipes for Two. There's over 80 original recipes with nice detailed instructions and plenty of tips and hints. It sells for $7.99. Go to our website, hotkitchenonline.com, and follow the links. It's available for your computer or your Kindle. And now I'm mise en place to move on to the spaghetti squash spirals. But before we do that, you're going to want to baste and check on the game hens first. Ooh, those are looking very nice. And you can see how my little potato roasting rack underneath them is doing a lovely job of elevating them above the rendered fat. Nice little loving dose of yummy, luscious butter. And I'm going to give these guys a little rotation to help them brown a little more evenly. And now it's all about the spaghetti squash. Stuff is so fun. Now, first of all, you need to give it a moment or two to cool before you start handling it because this is going to be a pretty hands-on kind of operation here. So just set them aside. I'm going to lose that very hot pan right there. And now it's time to make the herbed chèvre filling that's going to go in the spaghetti squash spirals. So I have about 2 ounces of chèvre cheese here. I'm just going to soften it up, much like one would soften up butter if they were making cookies, just kind of rubbing it with the back of a spoon. And then once you have a nice little consistency reached, add some herbs. I have about a tablespoon of fresh basil, a little pinch of fresh rosemary, and a little bit of parsley, about a ½ teaspoon's worth. And that's dried parsley that I'm using. Kind of rub it all together. There's a lot of salt already present in the cheese, so I'm not going to be adding any extra salt to the mix, but I'm going to add a little fresh cracked pepper, and to thin it out, just a touch of olive oil. You are going to love this. This was an idea I came up with the other night when I was just looking in the fridge, rummaging around with the leftovers that I had, and it was so good I decided to share the recipe with you all. That looks great right there. Now let's move on to the spaghetti squash. Once it is cool enough to handle, go to work. Use a fork, work around the outside of the squash first. Drive the fork in further. I like to circle around a couple times, kind of like doing laps. There we go. And then just kind of pull it out of there. The fork is the best tool for this particular squash because it helps those little fibers to come apart, like that. Look at how cute that is. Now you probably won't need the entire spaghetti squash for this dish, but do go ahead and prepare the whole thing and save the unused squash for something fun later. You can duplicate the same side dish again, or you could potentially work it into a casserole, or you could serve it with some spaghetti sauce as a nice gluten-free alternative to noodles. Still a little hot, so I am handling it carefully here. Go ahead and scrape it out. And there we go, spaghetti squash, freed from its husk. And now, take about half the spaghetti squash, because believe me folks, this is way too much for 2 people. Getting ahead of myself. Melt a couple tablespoons of butter in a nice pre-warmed saute pan. Squash is always good when treated with butter. Now add half the squash or so and give it a nice little toss. Your whole purpose here is to just coat the squash in butter, get it all flavored up. Maybe get a little browning on it. That's not really the main objective here. Now the next thing to do is kind of separate it out into 4 quadrants. Pull a little from here. This stuff is so fun. It just makes me giggle working with it. It's just so silly. Okay. And then just like you would a noodles or spaghetti, kind of grab your fork and twirl the spaghetti, kind of gathering it up into nice little rounds. Depending on how you cut your spaghetti squash and how that particular squash was configured, this may work better or worse than what you're seeing right here for you. That one's going nicely, there we go. Basically what you're doing is just creating 4 little portions of this amazing stuff. Spiraling it to build up a little structure to work with. Now, dig a little well into each one of your nice little piles. And just simply fill with about 1/4 of your cheese mixture. One of the cool things about goat cheese, Chevre cheese as it's also known, is that it doesn't really melt. It just kind of holds together. Another really cool thing about it, of course, is the flavor. It's just so pungent and delicious. I swear it makes any food better. And that's why it's a perfect match for these little spirals. Now allow the squash to brown a little on the bottom side and then flip over and brown on the other. So let's check on the game hens. I always find that the last few minutes of roasting goes really quickly. I'm gonna give them a temperature check. You wanna make sure internal temperature is 160 degrees. Much over that, you risk drying them out. Anything under that, you might be sick the next day. So, very good. Back to my spaghetti squash spirals. I'm seeing some nice browning around the edges, so I'm gonna go ahead and give them a gentle little flip here. I want to give the undersides a nice little chance to brown up a little bit too. Those look yummy. Put that little piece back up on top. There we go. Nobody will ever know. And now while those finish, let's make some salad. Now it's time for me to break out one of my favorite kitchen power tools, the stick blender. I love making dressings with a stick blender because it just emulsifies everything together beautifully. So find yourself something that will measure out 12 ounces. I'm choosing a nice liquid measuring cup. And to that add 2 ounces of balsamic vinegar, about a ½ ounce of water, a couple tablespoons of sugar, some herbs, about 1/4 teaspoon each of basil and parsley, and then a teaspoon of mustard powder and about a ½ teaspoon of salt. Just a little dollop of mayonnaise, about a teaspoon's worth, and then some grated garlic. I prefer to grate it because I think the flavor is smoother, and of course the grating helps it to dissolve away in the dressing and just kind of create a uniform taste. Just want to make sure to get all the stuff off the bottom of my little grater there. And then mix this stuff together. You can also use a regular old-fashioned whisk. Emulsify together the sugar, the seasonings, the vinegar, the water. That should do it, goes pretty quickly. And then add olive oil to make 12 ounces. Use a nice fresh olive oil for maximum nutritive and flavor. And then emulsify this all together. This makes a lovely, complex, zingy, sweet, and delicious balsamic vinaigrette. Take a little look here and see how these are doing. Yes, very nicely. Let those finish off, and then we'll finish off the salads. So I'm going to take a little bit of that dressing and toss it in some spring greens. I love greens and a nice balsamic. And it's fun to toss it too because then the entire leaf is coated. At least that's how I like it. And for this particular salad, it makes sense to toss the underlining in the dressing first. So just plate a little bit. Nice little mountain of greens. Greens are so nice to work with. They're so pretty and delicate. And each green has its own flavor profile, so it's also very complex. And this is a somewhat composed salad, so the next component is going to be ½ of an apple. I've cored it. And I sliced it and I stuck it back together so you could get a feel for how I sliced it. I'm just going to fan it out. The apple has a nice ability to stick to itself because of all the sugar and starches in there. I'm just going to lay it out there. And then dress up the rest of the salad with some pretty half red bell peppers, sliced nice and thin. A little garnish of shredded carrot. And a little cascade of croutons. And now it's time to duplicate the results on the other side. Love this. This is a lovely salad featuring a great seasonal fruit. When you're cooking with seasonal fruits and vegetables, not only does your food cost go down, but it tastes really good. You're supporting local agriculture, and it just makes sense on a budget. And then finish with a little drizzle of the vinaigrette over the apples and just a little over the veggies too. They're going to pick up a lot of dressing from the green underlining, so don't worry too much about the peppers and carrots. Just a little kiss. Oh, I can't wait to dig into that. Now, here's my sweetie's favorite part, the roasted game hen. Pull it up out of the roasting pan. We need to get rid of that little tie. And for dramatic effect, I'm going to go ahead and scoop the stuffing out. Kind of lay it off to the side so that he can see what sort of yumminess is awaiting him. There we go. Just a little pile, but it'll be yummy. Then frame in the other side of the plate with a couple of the spaghetti squash spirals. give them a little space. And we'll bring in this last Cornish game hen. One of the great things about cooking on the potatoes or a roasting rack is that the bottom side also gets delicious. It's not just logged in grease. There you go. You can see how tender they are. If I pull too hard, I'm gonna rip these little legs and wings right off the poor little bird. Yum. And these are ready. And look at you go. Some vinegar, some Cornish game hens, some fancy cheese, a whole bunch of love, and you've just whipped up another awesome gourmet feast on a dime to serve your sweetie on your next date night at home. So pair this up with a nice white wine or even a Pinot Noir, which is what we're going to be having. Goes with the cheese well.
And call in your sweetie.
Hi, sweetie.
Hi.
Dinner time.
Yum.
Hey, grab your salad. Yeah, grab your salad.
Yum. Oh, this looks so good.
One of your favorites. Oh, thank you. Such a gentleman.
Thank you. Oh, this looks good.
This is going to be like falling off the bone tender.
Oh my god. Yummy. This is such a hot kitchen.
So thanks for joining me in my hot kitchen tonight. Have fun turning up the heat in your kitchen, and I'll see you next week. Night night. Pet the kitties.